Hi, this is Dr. Randy Bach, and today's January 26, 2022. I am here to bring you a coronavirus conversation where we cover all things coronavirus. And coronavirus actually has become all things. Everything in the world is coronavirus. Everything that you do is a matter of public health. You are no longer yourself. You no longer have a choice. I don't necessarily, fully ascribe to the concept of your body, your choice, because certainly we've always had laws against suicide, which is your body and not your choice. Certain drug abuse, your body, not fully your choice. We've had kind of guardrails or bowling lane bumpers on various life choices. Um, but given the precept or the concept that the left has always, I guess, since the 60s had this concept, your body, your choice. And of course, that is actually not really entirely your body because your child inside you as a fetus or an embryo is really not your body completely. I am not my mother. I never was. She's no longer with us, and God bless her. And I'm certainly thrilled that she and my dad brought me to life along with my brothers. Um, but I was in her body. I wasn't part of her body, and I guess there were choices to be made. But anyway, but no longer is that operative. If it's no longer your body, your choice, in regards to an injection, which frankly is a little bit past its due date, a little bit outdated, outmoded. And we'll get to some of the contradictions about that in short order. Um, so if you buy into the concept of your body, your choice, when does that break? Well, it can break on the one side when you're doing harm to your body, um, suicide, drug abuse, narcotic addiction, all that kind of stuff. People are arrested for things of that sort. You can't be arrested for a successful suicide, and I don't think people really are arrested these days for unsuccessful suicides. That is to say, you still live, but nonetheless, suicide is not legal. It's considered a form of murder, I guess. Um, but on the other end of things, um, you wouldn't necessarily have, kind of. I don't think the state has the right to take away all of your choices regarding your body either. And if you make that choice, I do think there are um, kind of in the extreme situations where the state could, legally enforce a vaccine. I think there are legal statutes ranging from 100 years ago about that. And I've mentioned this before that George Washington's troops were inoculated with smallpox and they were forced to do so. They did it person to person. They took boil from one person and kind of pricked the skin of another person. So it was a very early stage of vaccine in a sense. But that was for smallpox. Smallpox is far, far, far more deadly, orders of magnitude more deadly, especially in the context of 18th century English colonies of America, than what we have now, which is an illness that is essentially uniformly non-fatal. I think the success rate is 99.97%, and those who are amongst the fatalities are generally median age 80, 82, with multiple comorbidities, with a life expectancy probably less than a year or so to begin with. For instance, half are about that status in nursing homes. So if this, again, my own phrase, but if this were aerosolized HIV, that, unlike, regular HIV, which you get on intimate contact or blood contact, if you could, inhale this, I'd probably have, dug a bunker and put, HEVA filters over it and all that kind of stuff right from the get-go, but it's not. And so we always have to consider what it is. It's not enough to just make, simple, um, kind of like binary phrases like it's my body my choice for all things. It's not, and it's not my body. I get no choice for all things. There's some median, and those things have to be examined. um, you know there are situations where it is very stark. I was exiting a conference room yesterday and it was all open, it seemed. And I guess I hadn't really seen there's a little pole. So it's kind of like guys walk through the glass doors. So the actual door was open, and all I saw when I looked over was I saw this clear space. So I just walked through this big open entry, but there was a pillar right in the middle, and I smacked my head. Um, So every situation has to be examined closely, or else you're going to be banging your head, as such as I did. Maybe that's, might be partial explanation from the things I tell you today, but at least I remember the event. I didn't pass out, and I'm probably no better or worse than I am usually. Um, so we do have a comment here. Let's see if we can read it. We need warp speed for all of these therapy treatments. Um, Okay, well, I think she's bringing up some things here. Our heroes last year were fired. The heroes from last year were fired, um, and this is a woman named Debbie, and she's bringing up the topic of some recent marches and protests against not specifically the vaccine, but against mandates for the vaccine. Um, I, like to say right at the get-go every week that I am pro-vaccine. I think vaccines are awesome. I think this vaccine was awesome, and I really wish that it had come out sooner in 2020, where it would have been the most effective. And I think that there would have been hundreds of thousands of lives saved at the onset, and lots of other, debility, illness, upheaval, and so forth. There's no magic, wand. Now, maybe in the future we'll be able to roll these things out much sooner. And at the early phases, before people get an illness, is the best time to have a vaccine come out, not while an illness is going on. And certainly, it's not really efficacious to have a vaccine for a virus that is now going on, not quite, but nearly 3 years old. With the influenza vaccination, we trot a new one out every year because it's a new flu bug. This Omicron is clearly a new bug, different, far enough different, and mutated far enough from the ancestral version of the COVID-19 2019 Wuhan virus that it needs new treatments. How do I know this? Well, I'm going to prove it to you shortly. Why don't I just go right to that? Let me just work on my super duper internet machine here. And I'm going to try to get this up as quickly as possible. Maybe I can't do it as quickly as possible. I'll go to the slides because these let me just add this here. So this is fairly recent news. The FDA halts use of antibody drugs that don't work versus Omicron. So what are these antibody drugs? Maybe we can go into them. This is another headline: patient beware. Some states are still pushing outdated COVID treatments. Use of newly ineffective antibody therapies that don't work against the Omicron variant is highest in a dozen states. So this issue has come up in regard to, I think, a battle in the White House between the president's handlers, the president's men, and Governor DeSantis of Florida, who was looking for more of the monoclonal antibody treatment. So so I think they're pulling these out, as kind of a political tit for tat, because Florida has not been as gung ho on the mandating of vaccines at this point as the White House would like. So I think this came from political tip that prompted the FDA to do this. Maybe they should have done it. Maybe they would have done it anyway. I can't answer that. But these are the couple of the unpronounceable medications in question. The AB at the end of these words means antibody. So let's see if I can do this. Bamlanivimab and Tezepelumab. I apologize. If I did this a few times, I'd probably get them right. I didn't practice. But the highlighted portion here is COVID. This is an infusion treatment for COVID-19. Both types of these two antibodies target the surface spike protein of SARS-CoV-2. Do we remember what that is? Yes, that's the same thing that the vaccine is aiming for. So what's the difference between a monoclonal antibody and a vaccine? Well, we'll get to that shortly. But let's read this other. These are both from Wikipedia. Bamlanivimab is a monoclonal antibody. Eli Lilly, so forth. It was granted an emergency use authorization in November 2020, and the EUA was revoked in April 2021. So that's one that's already been revoked. And there are a couple other ones, probably similarly unpronounceable, but they rhyme with the AB at the end, that were revoked more recently. And these are medications by Regeneron, pharmaceutical company. Why were they revoked? Well, let's just think a little bit about, I'm going to go to one slide further. Oops, sorry. Let's think about what a monoclonal antibody is. Well, when we make antibodies to anything, before viruses, without therapeutics, without treatment. You're a 5-year-old kid and you get the sniffles or something like that, or you get a cut on your arm. Um, if there are new things entering your body will mount an immune response. And without going too far into this, these little green guys here are your antibodies. What are they anti to? Well, they're antibodies. They are going after the body of the infecting agent. In this case, this is SARS-CoV-2. And this human cell is a lymphocyte cell. It doesn't say that here, but this is the cell that's going to chew this guy up and gobble him up, dissolve him, eat him, make him harmless. How does this human cell lymphocyte know which things to gobble up? Well, there's basically a two-sided. These are Y-shaped, but there's two little lobular kind of protein masses over here that fit. There's kind of a key and a lock. It fits into this, and it's actually a little bit like a soap. I don't know if you know what a soap, soap we use in detergent, shampoo. Those actually are similar to antibodies in the sense that they have what's called a hydrophilic and a lipophilic end. That is, one end likes water and the other end likes oil. So if you have a greasy stain on your hand, or your hair is greasy, the oily end, the big long oily end, and soaps are made out of fats, which are long oils, and they're fatty acids. So the other end, the acid end, has kind of like a thing that grabs onto water, attracted to water. It's ionic. And the other one is, a bunch of hydrocarbon chain, and it's kind of greasy, as it were. It doesn't really attract anything else. It repels. So it's like Vaseline and so forth. Anyway, so the oily end sits on the oil, and then the other end, as water goes by, it grabs onto it and zips off. So that's how soap works. Antibodies are similar in that sense. It has two separate ends, two business ends. Although it looks like a Y, really just one of these little green lobs over here, the lobular side, is going to be used. And these are going to be keys to this door. And the other end is a key to the door of the virion, or virion, however you want to pronounce it, virus particle. And so we make these things. Every time we do it, pretty much they are monoclonal. That is to say, mono means one, and clonal means, like the Clone Wars, they're all the same. So it's basically, you're making one production line, like, I don't know, Ford Motor Company, if they're making, I don't know, an Escort or something like that, a 2021, if they still make them, Escort, all the cars pretty much are the same. There might be minor differences with cars, but there are a lot of things in production, you make all the same thing. When Snickers makes, a certain size Snickers bar, they're all the same. Although that's basically a monoclonal production of Snickers or Reese's cups or whatever it happens to be. So monoclonal, just leave that word aside, means one production. And for this one thing, we're going to make this one type of antibody, all well and good. Well, the monoclonal antibody treatment is somebody else's antibodies, and it was made in the lab, or theoretically you could take it from another person, but that has some, infection risk. But I think these days these are made, with plasmids and using bacteria and so forth. And these guys will churn out and make an antibody that we can extract, isolate, and save, and use and inject in somebody who doesn't have these antibodies yet. So if you experienced any particular infection and you haven't developed the antibodies, we give you this, and it gives you a head start on knocking these guys out, because this little, the one end, the part without the lob, will attach the spike protein, and the other end will attract to and attach to the human lymphocyte, and then it'll all, like the soap, it'll all gonna whisk away, and you're all done. This be eaten and it's gone. So let's go back to the previous slide. So how different is that from vaccine therapy? Well, pretty much everything's the same, except in one case, you're giving it to somebody automatically. So it's expensive, thousands of dollars probably, and you have to get the right one. You have to inject it, and it's done. So I think when President Trump had COVID, and probably when Boris Johnson had COVID, they are top flight guys, and they're going to, heads of their country, and they get the best treatment and so forth, and boom, zip, they probably had monoclonal antibody therapy, and they're off to the races. I don't think everybody does get it. I don't know if they, do means testing, financial testing and so forth, or insurance and whatnot. I guess my dog is tired of my talking, so he's exiting, but I hope you stay. He's a little bit picky, doesn't want to hear much about vaccines, I guess. So what is the difference? Let's see if I have a better slide on this. So this is maybe a clearer slide of what a vaccine does. This is an mRNA. If you want to call the mRNA vaccine from Pfizer a vaccine, fine. It's not, basically it's a pre-vaccine, because it's the genetic code reading of like the blueprint that your body's going to actually build the vaccine itself, as opposed to every year prior vaccine, which was preformed and it's injected and it's either from in a virus or something like that, or it's a native form and given to you. But in this case, we are making the spike protein an analog to the spike protein ourselves. So this is, I guess, the basic here. This is what the virus looks like. We get a look at this. They make the mRNA to make an antibody, excuse me, to make this spike protein itself. We inject it, it goes into our cell. We read this mRNA as if it's our own, and hopefully it dies off pretty soon because we don't want it to go forever. My understanding is it lasts a few months, but nobody's really positive about this. But I don't want to, make fears go too high, because I don't think there've been huge problems with long-acting production of spike protein from the mRNA injections. Nonetheless, we make something that looks like this. This little red guy over here looks like this little red guy over here, and it goes off into the bloodstream, and we make our antibodies because this thing is here. Now, the spike proteins are recognized, and when they see another one, like in the previous slide, on an actual virus, they already have it, that an antibody. So this is exactly the same thing as monoclonal antibodies, except this monoclonal antibodies were made in a laboratory using probably a bacterial plasmid process, isolated and injected, expensive. And the vaccines is also expensive, much less expensive. We're making most of the work ourselves, and we get to produce it for longer periods of time. The antibody therapy will last, as it says here, weeks to month. And the vaccine theoretically lasts years to lifetime, although as we've seen, in this case, it doesn't last for variant strains, which are different from the one you're giving it to. So if you have a COVID-19 vaccination, it's probably going to be working against original COVID, ancestral version COVID-19 for years. It's not working for. The reason people get boosters is they're working on a misconception that the vaccine to COVID-19 is working as well on the later variants. There's no reason to think that. These are later variants. It's like, do you look exactly like your cousin? Do you look exactly like your mother or your, one of your siblings? You might if you're identical twins, but barring that, you're going to have some similarities and some differences. And this comes out very effectively in this news that that these antibody drugs, basically the monoclonal antibodies, the same type of antibodies that we are accessing through the mRNA vaccine process, don't work against Omicron. Logically, the only conclusion is that the same thing is true with the COVID-19 vaccine today versus Omicron, because, and again, it's totally understandable outside of the kind of the harsh indoctrination and kind of crazy reactionary spasms that people go into if you mention anything that contradicts that COVID-19 vaccine must be given over and over again for everybody all the time. This is just, again, I'm really super pro vaccine, but I think that you have to make the distinction of what it's for. If you're, I don't know, going to go into the West African jungle, you get yellow fever vaccine. Awesome. And I think now they have newly made a dengue vaccine. You're going to go to jungle in Brazil, get a dengue vaccine. Fine. If they find a new variant strain, and when Zika came out, for instance, they didn't have either. They didn't have a dengue or a Zika vaccine. There's probably some crossover. It's not going to be as good. You probably get a dengue vaccine, maybe helps you a little bit against Zika, but they don't have a specific Zika one. Why? They are working on one theoretically. Why are they working on one? Because they're different. Dengue and Zika are almost twins. They're very, very similar, but they are different. And so people are making a different one. Why is there like this harsh kind of repercussions for anybody who points out that this vaccine, just like the monoclonal antibodies that are being pulled from the market for the simple reason that they are antiquated, they were awesome. They worked, but they don't work now. I mean, the Super 8 tapes were awesome back in the, I guess, early 70s or something like that. And people had them. They didn't have anything else. They were the best thing to have, but they were superseded by other things. And then the CD player came along, and then, I don't know, then we have, I don't know, podcasts, you have Bluetooth, you have downloads, so everything, it's awesome for its time. It just, it's ready to move on. So if your answer to somebody having, wants to listen to music is to go buy LP records, I mean, that's reasonable advice. And some people might like that. Some people prefer vinyl LP records and a player and so forth, but it's an older solution to an older problem, which is listening to music. And they're much newer solutions. They get modified all the time. I'm sure whatever we come up with today, people are going to look at 3, 4, 5 years as really silly and antiquated. I mean, this is over and over again. Anyway, let's see if I have anything useful here else to talk about. So my major point here is that if the FDA can pull the emergency EUA, the emergency use authorization for monoclonal antibodies that are antiquated, no longer work against Omicron, they should be thinking about doing the same thing, or at least not mandating it regarding the mRNA injections. One other point is, obviously the antibody treatment is different from the vaccine in the ways we delineate on this chart here. But there are still some antibody, monoclonal antibody treatments out on the market. So they didn't eliminate all of them. They made a distinction which ones are new-ish and which ones work. There's some that came out specifically for Delta variant, for instance. And presumably there are some that work pretty well. I don't think they were made specifically for Omicron because Omicron's rather new, but by the time you watch this, maybe in a week or two, maybe they will have them specifically for Omicron. And so they keep making a new batch for the new virion. But the vaccine, no, they have not done that. There is a version coming out by Pfizer supposedly in March for the Omicron. And so what does that tell us? Well, they're doing an update. If you have Windows or Mac or whatever, you get updates on your operating system. I'm on Windows 11, I think now. I suppose I could run Windows 7, but I wouldn't run very much on it. And I had it at one point, and I probably had all the other ones in between. You can do the numbers. But there's no real rationale to keep at it when there's something newer and better. So this is, and again, the fact that they still have at least one monoclonal antibody approved by the FDA shows that they are able to make this distinction between the older ones and the new ones, and to show that the coding of Omicron is different from that from Delta, and Delta is different from Gamma, Beta, Alpha, and Ancestral. And so those are the major strains. There's obviously some other Greek letters we're missing in the meanwhile, but they have not traveled the world to the same extent. On this slide set, so this is just a little interesting piece. I hear this from Michael Knowles all the time, and I went to go check it out. He says public health. The word public, comes from the same root word as politics, and so yes, polis means a bunch of people, means the city, and publicus refers to of the people but also of the state, done for the state. And so when we hear public health, it doesn't mean they have to do this, but the root term of public, in a sense, is not just about you. It's about done for the state. So there's your health, and then there's the state's health. And last week we had an interesting, well, I thought it was interesting, slide set from an Italian professor, and I recommend you go back and check that out. And he was talking about the individualistic versus the holistic approach. And his terms are a little bit different from what you might normally think of with those words of public health. And in the long run, I mean, just to kind of make it more concise, the holistic approach is actually the opposite of what we might consider it that. Rather than dealing with the whole of the population, it's actually dividing the problem up and trying to decide the best type of treatment for certain segments of your population. And that's the essence of the Great Barrington Declaration, which was early in the pandemic, which is that, it's not one size fits all. We needn't lock down everybody when you really want to keep at kind of the safest place, the elderly and infirm. And we've made a misapplication based on this aspect of kind of misinterpreting health as something that's done for the state, or early on, in a sense, done for the removal of the state. There was so much that was political. When I read things now, the way things were characterized back in 2020 versus now, I mean, we can go no further than, say, the president, vice president, who cast huge doubts about the efficacy and the safety of the vaccine. They wouldn't take one themselves, but as soon as a Democrat was in the Oval Office, they were all on board with it. It was a huge about face, emotionally, morally, logically, and so forth. I didn't really do much with the slides today. Let's see if there's anything else here. But this is a point I'd like to bring up, because I hear this all the time, how kids have to be, wrapped up. I am the president of the Newton Taxpayer Association in Newton, Massachusetts, and I have a separate show once a month on New TV, and I can send you a link if you're interested. But I had a candidate, a city councilor, on the show, and he's a wonderful guy, and he's really bright guy, articulate, and he's a good advocate for the people. He's lived here his whole life, except for some schooling. And I like him, and I think he's forthright. He's very knowledgeable about a lot of topics, but brings up this concept of kids super spreading the virus. This has never been the case. I forget when this headline was made, but this has been known for over a year, that the elderly and overweight, and frankly, when you combine those two together, moderately elderly and overweight, because a lot of your super elderly are not really overweight, as they get into the nursing home phase and so forth, are the real COVID super spreaders. And I'll show you an article, which I've shown many, many times before, but I think it's a useful thing to bring up, that this is just not the case. I actually like this drawing too. So kids don't really have the volume of breathing in and out. They don't have the same propulsion with their sneezes. They're little people, and so they're passing air in and out very differently. They have a much more their peak of health, and their immune system kind of handles their kind of generic first line immune system is much better than ours. And we might be in a sense be compromising a lot of that by giving them vaccine when they don't need it. We're never getting ill from this, and never getting sick, and they were never super spreaders. Sweden showed this. They had the schools open the entire time. This is one amongst these is the grandchild of a friend of mine, and this is Florida. And I circled two kids who are wearing masks. It could be their body, their choice. Obviously, it's not their choice. It'll be their parents. Their parents' choice. Their parents' kids' body. And so the other kids are not. Florida is not having a huge epidemic of problems or issues with kids. These kids are all happy, they're all healthy, and they've been doing this for the duration. Sweden, ditto. So, the experimentation, what I heard from my talk with the city councilor was that we can't do this, it's not safe, and so forth. But even locally, the Catholic schools have not been doing this, and people are not dropping dead. The teachers nor the kids have had severe health problems. So I don't understand, the concept of public health, I get it. So if we have, Ebola on wings, if we have HIV on wings, we have the plague without current day antibiotics. If we had smallpox without, if we were 17th century Europe with smallpox, yeah, I get it. You got to do some real, kind of moving people around, locking things down, quarantining, and whatnot. This isn't it. This is not this. This is not the same. And you have to look at context. You have to check degree. And so a lot of these things, these precepts we keep hearing, all the stuff you keep hearing, going back to the original slides, that, some states are still pushing outdated COVID treatments. Well, so is the federal government. So is everybody else who's pushing essentially an outdated, we'll call it with quotes, flu shot. It's for a flu that was 2019, COVID-19. So I say this over and over again. So, you can't, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You got to be consistent in what you're saying and thinking. So if they can keep, coming up with and turning out and getting rid of new monoclonal antibody treatments, which are looking for the different spike proteins, because each of these variants come out with slightly different looking spike proteins. My favorite example is the Baldwins. If you have a restraining order for Alec Baldwin, you know precisely what it looks like. You got a policeman downstairs, and you're never going to let Alec Baldwin in. I get it. He's a very distinctive voice. Everybody knows who he is. He's famous, and so forth. And you never let him in your house. Fine. But Stephen Baldwin comes in, or Alec Baldwin's nephew, Joey or something like that. Those Baldwins will get in because they're related, but they're not Alec. And so your restraining order for original Alec Baldwin type 1 does not work. The ancestral Alec Baldwin restraining order will not work for Stephen, Daniel, Jimmy, whatever. I don't know. I've run out of Baldwins, but I think you get the idea. These things change. And if you don't change your restraining order, then you are going to let the wrong ones in. Now, Omicron is such a minor Baldwin or COVID that it doesn't really matter. So the fact that Pfizer is making vaccine for this is great for Pfizer, and I'm sure somebody in the federal government is going to wind up pushing it once they, keep showing the data that the vaccine is really an irrelevancy for current Omicron, and they're going to start pushing that. But fact of the matter is, we've never had vaccines for the common cold. We've never pursued them for the common cold because the common cold is not bad enough. So again, this is a situation where we're using a gradation, a distinction, and we're making a choice about something that it's not smallpox, it's not even COVID-19, it's not even Delta, and so forth. And each of these, virion strains have gotten milder compared to the original ancestral version. So I've spent a lot of time going back and forth on these slides. I hope they were of use to you. I'm not sure I have any more of that set. So I'm just going to zip back to this one and maybe cut this out. I'm going to go to some questions, and let's see if we had any people interested in what we've said tonight. Um, um, so I had the monoclonal treatment. It works. Well, that's, so I don't think people will die now without it. I don't think more people will die now without it because Omicron is milder than the previous versions, and they will keep making new ones. There's money to be had, and they can churn these things out. All they need, basically, they need a different, it's like the guy when you, have your key made at the locksmith, or, they look at the coding of that previous key or whatever the lock is, and they make another one just like it. So they can just churn out new ones if there's some other Greek letter, or if we move to some other concept, they will just make new ones down the line. So I think it's not an either or, but Omicron is so mild, and people have frankly built up so much immunity through the exposure to the virus itself, and with the treatment, the vaccines and so forth, that I just think there's less of a captive audience for the virion. So this thing will be dying off over time, and we're going to find other things to worry about. We have the skirmishes in Ukraine, and there'll be going to be other things that people wind up changing their attention to. And we only have a limited amount of money, even though we seem to be printing it like crazy. There's only a limited amount you can do with that because now we have inflation. So I don't necessarily agree with that premise. I think they can make new ones, and most, a lot of the kind of the dry tinder wood, underfoot at the forest makes the forest fire. A lot of the, elderly, vulnerable, passed away through the first round of COVID, and a lot of them have since been vaccinated and multiply, double, triple, and so forth. And at some point, those vulnerable will be getting the new Pfizer, Omicron, or whatever, subsequent version comes out. So the good news is that we are getting better at churning out these mRNA vaccines, and this will hold us in good stead for the next pandemic, if there is one. But we have to be smarter in the public health sense. It's not just their job to handle our public health. We are part of the public, and we're not of the state. We are of ourselves, our families, our groups, and we have to be considerate insofar as the public health doesn't necessarily do that themselves. And the fact that we, have had such, different, disparate takes on COVID, from Sweden, which didn't lock down at all, and Florida, which barely, and some other places which stay locked down and want people to wear masks, even though they've been triply vaccinated, and aren't doing any necessarily better. We have to take this matter into our own hand. We have, basically the Library of Congress on a smartphone, walking around with it. And if people just listen to Brian Stelter or, Rachel Maddow tell you stuff and you should be in fear, well, go for it. My mother-in-law is 90 years old. She's in the basement. She has basically not quite 24/7, but maybe a good, 16/7 listening to MSNBC. That's a number of hours per day, and we're down there here and there to help take care of her. And if it's not the insurrection, it's COVID is horrible. There's another variant coming around. The hospitals are overloaded and so forth. There's one last issue we'll probably get to regarding hospitals. I'm going to read one question first. Is there any reason they don't shift from mRNA vaccination to more of an inoculation type approach, especially with the low lethality severity of the Omicron variant? Well, that's an excellent question, Joe. Thank you. I think the mRNA vaccine is easier to make. You don't need to go through the middleman step. We become the middleman ourselves, and if it's safe, we don't know that for a fact yet. We haven't done this, seen results for years, but a few years, 4 or 5 years down the road, if it turns out this was completely safe, it's probably an easier formulation. You don't have to grow the intermediary microbes. It is a little bit, less stable, so it has to be kept, super frozen and whatnot. But it's probably relatively easy to change out because you're just changing some genetic code that's going to make a different protein. The better we get at that, the better we're going to do. Other than nefarious reasons, I'm curious if there's a tenable reason as to the push for the mRNA. Well, I mean, that's an excellent question. Um, I think it's basically a purer version. If the way we do the flu shots, we, um, uh, what do we do? We basically take kind of a plasmid piece, like a DNA piece, and inject it into um, into uh, an adenovirus, I believe, a cold virus, and we have that thing do the work of what our cells do with the mRNA. So they're all very similar process. We go back to the vaccine slide, you can see some of that. So these are, technically not vaccines in the classical sense. I don't think they're necessarily that different. They might very well be more efficient over time. So I'm not opposed to mRNA vaccines per se, but I think the fact that we, rolled them out during a pandemic rather than before might be some issues for secondary problems. I think the fact that we're pushing them on people who have natural full immunity, even to the ancestral version, itself is ludicrous, because I think those people can have some antibody dependent enhancement, kind of like an autoimmune problem with repeated boosting, sending this spike protein into your body via our own production, via our muscle cells and so forth. So nobody knows the answer to that, but I think the pushing has to do with the narrative that they can't basically back down from. And so, that's its own issue. I was going to talk about a little bit about hospitals. I had some other pages up, and I'm going to maybe go over them very briefly if I can do this fast enough. So I'm maybe just go through a bunch of slides, a bunch of these web pages very quickly, unless there are any other questions. So this is a slide from an article from, I think it's early 2021. It's hard to see this, but the red triangles are super spreaders, and this is a product of your BMI times your age. So let's say you are 50 years old and you have a BMI of 20. You're going to be right in this range over here where my cursor is rolling around. If you're 50 years old and you have a BMI of, let's say 30, let's see, 30 times 50, 1500, you're probably in this range over here. And we see there are some super spreaders because there are more people on this end of the realm, because there are a lot more young people in general. But in this realm where the numbers thin out, where there aren't that many people of high product of BMI. So if you're 40 years old and BMI of 40, this group over here, if you just look at the right side of the slide, you start to have the triangles outnumber the black dots. So there are some super spreaders on a random basis, but they're very low percentage of the population. But once your age weight product goes up, you have much, much higher numbers. And so this is a difficult slide to get for the novice, but I think it's very important. I think you should pay attention to it. Let's see. This one, it's not humorous, but stressed hospitals are asking workers with COVID to return, even if they may be infectious. This boggles the mind. Why? So they're firing. The reason they're stressed, hospitals, is they have fired workers who refused to get the vaccine, who already had COVID. So they have COVID full immunity, what we always considered full immunity, but they're not taking the shot, an antiquated shot, an outdated shot to the virus they already had. Probably, I mean, I think there are good medical reasons not to do that, not to, prompt what I mentioned, the antibody dependent enhancement syndrome, or show up more spike protein, get sick even for a day or two when there's no need for it. And there's no long-term data. We've never, ever given, kind of repeated vaccinations to somebody who's already had the illness. This has never happened. And so you come up with this absurdity that somehow vaccinated workers who are getting Omicron, which is not covered by the vaccine, can come back to work and pass COVID around if they're infectious, and that's better than admitting the mistake. I don't know. I don't know what to say here. You just, you help me out. So what else we got here? This is an article I read, not really well enough, how Omicron upended what we thought we knew about natural immunity. I think there's probably a lot to criticize here. I don't think it's doing anything of the sort. I think this is what's called a category error. This writer here is making the assumption that the vaccine works against Omicron. Your natural immunity, you might very well have natural immunity to COVID-19, but the Omicron is not COVID-19. Common colds come around, and they come around over and over again amongst a category of adenoviruses, rhinoviruses, respiratory syncytial viruses, and coronaviruses. historically. Rhinovirus, did I miss that one? Anyway, there's about 5 different common cold type viruses, and they change all the time. And the influenza does the same thing. We all know this. So this is nothing to say anything about natural immunity. It's just this is a new one, and it's probably close to the common cold. And we might get other ones that start labeling these coronaviruses when they come around. We had coronaviruses forever. As long as humans have been humans, there have been viruses, and viruses precede us on the biologic scale in time-wise, and it's always been something, and it's always been there. And coronavirus has been around forever, and blah blah blah. I don't know what else to say about this either. So I'll maybe link the article. Maybe I'll look at it. Maybe I'm not giving her the benefit of the doubt. I'll look at it more carefully at some point if somebody brings it up. Immune system versus virus. Why Omicron had experts worried from the start. How the immune this is kind of like worry porn. South Africa had the virus a full month before us. They have 10% vaccination, 15% vaccination amongst the population. So pretty much everybody's not vaccinated, and they did just fine. It was like a common cold. It was 1/10 as problematic as Delta. So I don't know why people say this. This is from the Telegraph. This is I got a paywall here, so I'm not going to be able to show it to you. I apologize. I'll move on to the next slide. So this one here is whoops, I ruined that one. It's about the nudge unit in Downing Street. Downing Street's controversial nudge unit accused of exploiting scare tactics during COVID crisis. Well, you can read through this. And this is something we've done here. There are emails between Doctors Fauci and Collins, the heads of the NIAID and the NIH, respectively, basically trying to do a propaganda war against the Declaration signees and developers. And we're fortunate to have Jay Bhattacharya here in 2 weeks to discuss this. This is the of the and for the state, for whatever its reasons are, not necessarily your health or interest. This is kind of not quite in the realm of conspiracy. This is an actual video, 2019, where Dr. Fauci's in a group, a symposium, and they're talking about disruptive new outbreak in China, somewhere to blow the system up and enforce universal mRNA vaccination. So I can put this link up. This is an actual video. You can listen to it. It's from C-SPAN, very reputable. And, they want a universal flu vaccine. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. He's in this kind of realm. He's trying to act cool. He knows all the stuff. And the viruses tend to come from China. So it's not extraordinary the way it all comes together. So I don't want to sound conspiratorial about it, but you might be, interested in listening to it, because this shows a lot of the public health people had their game plan in place, no matter what was going to happen. And when things happened differently, they didn't really change that. So that's a sadness for us. A lot of these lockdowns and so forth were already there. The snake oil salesman and the COVID zero con, a classic bait and switch for a lifetime of booster shots, immunity as a service. So this is an interesting article, and I'll post it separately. It's a long read. But the key word here is COVID, or hyphenated word is COVID zero. This presumption that somehow we will never have any coronavirus. Now, it's no longer COVID-19. We're again now on Omicron, which is COVID-21. But this concept, like what Israel's doing, is I think they're on their 4th vaccination. Maybe it's their 3rd booster, but their 4th shot. And it doesn't doing anything. People have more cases than they've had, in months. And they're giving all these shots out. So I hope there are no side effects, because, it's a whole country, and it'd be kind of sad if they all, wind up with weird stuff happening to them based on a bad public health order. I'm going to pass this over. Some other things I was interested in. So Dr. Robert Malone notably was on with Joe Rogan, and he's here talking about why not to have a vaccine mandate. I can put a link up for this as well. These are just things I've been grazing on. This is a kind of not a specific slide, but I was listening to a doctor from California saying that, doctors are under threat of losing their medical license if they give any type of vaccine medical exemption, and they're going to be scrutinized, basically like inviting the IRS to audit you. You might be right, but it's still very expensive, painful, and deliberative, and not conducive to good business practice to be investigated. So this is again kind of a heavy hand of the board and of government to have its word done, even if it doesn't necessarily back up with the other things it's doing. It's very much like Alice in Wonderland, the Mad Hatter and so forth, where it's right because he said it, and because he said it, it's right. This is something we've already covered in depth tonight. What's this one here? This is regarding the hearings in Washington, and I'm going to probably call it a day soon. This is something we already did cover as well, and this talks about monoclonal antibodies. So any of these links, if you're interested in, I'm happy to provide them separately. This is the news story I was brought to you earlier. So I think that does it. I could probably go over state by state in different countries comparison, but maybe we'll save that for another day when I haven't used as much time up as I already did tonight. So I thank you for your time. Let me see if I can go over any questions. So Glenn writes, we will be waiting a long time, forever, for that type of candor. I have a Russian reader who I wrote something I can't understand. So I think that's going to be it for tonight. Do me a favor, if you can, pass this around, criticize me, comment, contradict me. If I'm wrong, I should know about it. If I'm wrong, you should know about it. But if I'm not, ditto, everybody should know about it. Please pass this around. I can't really, take over the internet myself. And I don't necessarily want to. It's a tricky place. But I do think some of the things we talked about tonight are of import. And I really don't see it covered anywhere else, especially the monoclonal antibody part in regard to the vaccine, admitting that the monoclonal antibodies go out of date, but somehow the vaccine, for the same formulation to make the same antibodies do not. So if you can answer that question, you're smarter than I am. And I welcome you to join the comments and maybe in our show if you have something very interesting, useful to say. So that's it for now. The news I just want to bring up to bear. If you're interested in reading my new Zika book, it's coming out in February. I'm aiming for with a release in Brazil, but I have English and Spanish versions as well. And I think it's kind of earth-shattering. I have a smaller article. Hopefully, I'm getting published in one of the medical journals as we speak. It's being reviewed. And I think, I think it's really interesting. I'm not a public health guy by training, but I think it's interesting to see all the flaws in the way public health has been done. It's been very, very sloppy. The Zika microcephaly pandemic was much more sloppy than COVID. And if you're interested in that, give me a holler and I'll send you some stuff to look at. At any rate, so that's it for tonight. What are the closing words? I don't know. How about good night? And thank you so much for letting me into your home. Bye-bye.